Welcome to Forthright, Reader Feedback Edition. I'm Sulani Madsen. Instead of a traditional wrap up the year column, my last column of 2021 took a look at dropping trust in media, how headlines spin the news, and why we all need to be our own fact checkers looking for missing context. And the result was this column. What's missing from this picture? Published December 30, 2021 in the Spokesman Review. Public trust in mass media has been dropping for 25 years and is at the second lowest level ever, right behind 2016. Distrust among self-identified Republicans, according to Gallup, has stayed flat from 2020 levels, while trust among Democrats and independents has dropped 5 points. It's one of many troublesome trends for regional newspapers like the Spokesman Review, just as much as for the Washington Post, CNN, and Fox News networks of the world. Confidence shrinks every time a story is perceived as missing context or missing information. But every story will always be missing some context and can't possibly include all relevant information. Deciding what to include and what to leave out is like packing a carry-on suitcase and making the judgment call on whether you'll really need that extra sweater. Given the near zero and sub-zero temperatures this week, holiday visitors from Arizona may have wished they brought that sweater. Judgment calls on which information to include or exclude affects both opinion columns and straight reporting. Tuesday's Spokesman Review included a story with useful advice on keeping your car running in the cold. An expert mechanic was quoted recommending warming up your car for about 15 minutes before starting your travels, both for smoother engine operation and a more alert driver. But the advice was missing a relevant warning. In this state, leaving your car running in the driveway for 15 minutes while you go back inside to fetch a hot cup of coffee is a violation of RCW 46-61-600, although the likelihood of a citation is minimal. Presumably, readers will know if they are in a neighborhood where car theft is a hazard and decide appropriately. And a headline reading, "How to Keep Your Car Running Despite Frigid Weather," accurately describes the focused content. But too often, headlines may spin a story in a direction contrary to the content. In my opinion, and this is clearly labeled an opinion column, Wednesday's Spokesman Review front page headline reading, "Washington reports record number of daily COVID-19 cases," with the deckhead below saying, 6,235 tops previous day ceiling by over 700, says Department of Health, was an example of critical missing context. There's no reason to doubt the numbers. In my experience, editors are very careful about numbers, names, titles, and other quite objective facts. It's the implication that these numbers are somehow both meaningful and alarming. Counting cases without context is a useless statistic. Are there more cases identified because more people are testing? Have we really identified all the cases when test kits have been scarce? Do we know anything about the rate among those who are reluctant to test because they just don't want the hassle of potentially being forced to quarantine when they have no symptoms and have work to be done? None of those questions can be answered without a testing protocol using a representative cross-section of the population, both symptomatic and asymptomatic. And while 6,235 cases identified in one day in the state of Washington sounds like a big number, it means a mere 0.08% of the total population tested positive for COVID-19. And being able to calculate a percentage rate down to 2 decimal places still doesn't put it in context, as this new seasonal virus moves through different regions at different times. Are we doing better or worse than other places at the same stage? Can't tell from these numbers. But compared to the U.S. Navy warship, where a third of a young, healthy, and 98% vaccinated crew tested positive, 0.08% sounds positively miraculous. It reminds me of a lesson drilled into us at public information officer training for fire districts. When reporters show up at the scene of an emergency, give them numbers and a place to take pictures of big red trucks with flashing lights. Responding to the scene were 24 firefighters and 12 trucks from 3 districts across 2 counties and 1 partridge in a pear tree, says the PIO confidently. Numbers alone don't tell you if that was too few personnel, the right trucks for the job, or whether there should have been more partridges or pear trees. Authoritative sounding numbers without context are the source of misinformation and misunderstanding. Whether your sources are mainstream news publications or videos circulating secretly on social media, And we can't rely on social media to fact check for us. Facebook is defending itself against a defamation lawsuit brought by journalist and commentator John Stossel by admitting their fact check labels are opinions. Facebook's own third-party reviewers have admitted Stossel's reporting was factually accurate, while also claiming they had no obligation to actually watch his videos before publicly labeling two of them as partly false and missing context. Facebook simply didn't like the tone he used. On the eve of 2022, it's tempting to tune it all out, but we need engaged citizens. Listen to a variety of sources and check the tone for yourself. Trust but verify. I've had too many people I know in the last few weeks say they've just tuned out the news completely because it's just too much, too hard to winnow out what's truth from fiction. But most of the feedback on this column was positive. From Jim, a usually feisty progressive correspondent, he says, "You pretty much nailed it today on the topic, context or lack thereof. That is a constant irritant to a rabid news consumer like me. The temptation to affirmation bias is so strong in most readers, myself sometimes included, that the subtle, sometimes even inadvertent omission of important context can lead us to unsupportable conclusions on important issues." And from Dr. J, a regular fan of the column and reader of the Spokesman Review, who agreed with the problem of missing context but wanted to go further, saying, "Good shot but not a bullseye." Dr. J says, "The public's lack of confidence in the Fourth Estate revolves around its woke vision of itself as change agents or kingmakers. This is most evident by the leanings of guest columnists and media sources, and even trickles down to choice of comics. Hearing from divergent points of view is healthy and needed, and he has complaints about a couple of columnists and comics. Do we have enough credible column writers nationwide to choose a different one each week over the course of a year?" So he's looking for more diversity, more opinions, more different points of view. And Dr. J may be right about the Fourth Estate having an agenda, although I tend to think it's more of an unconscious representation of bias, combined with a tendency for any group of professionals to see themselves as more important than they are. Architects, for example, can get all worked up about how design will change the world, solve society's problems, create utopia if we just have the right built environment, when most clients are just hoping the roof doesn't leak. I predict that pointing out media bias will be a recurring theme in columns in 2022. From Terry and Debbie, who are looking for unfiltered journalism and sources that do not skew biased. They said, "It seems the latest surveys out there support the continued mistrust among the public and declining numbers in either viewing or reading anything of the media, and I'm about there myself." But we still need your reading, Terry and Debbie. And then there was this angry sounding email from Phil, who wanted to know if my analysis included, and he lists a bunch of far right sources, or just what you conservatives refer to as lamestream media. Republican voters, he says, Republican voters may be suspicious of what they read in the Spokesman Review, but liberals and progressives are getting pretty fed up with the lies and misinformation coming out of right-wing news outlets. You always refer to the anger expressed by conservatives on the right, but you need to get ready for a lot of the increasing rage I see in people who consider themselves progressives or liberals. Well, I never use silly terms like lamestream media. And I think I made it pretty clear in referencing Washington Post, CNN, and Fox News that my criticism extends to media across the bias spectrum. But I told him that his email was an example of why we seriously need to focus on relearning how to disagree agreeably. And I told him spiraling rage is not a recipe for a happy new year. Well, Phil wrote back, continued the dialogue, complaining, "My tone has been sharpened by numerous conversations with conservatives in which I have been referred to as a libtard, socialist, and snowflake. Although I am a Vietnam veteran, my patriotism has also been questioned. I have long since ceased to argue or discuss politics with conservatives, given the level of anger and vituperativeness I have encountered. I often read analysis from people who are described as liberals, imploring me to make efforts to try to understand the positions of conservatives and to reach out to them. I have yet to read a similar plea from a conservative journalist." So I responded to him and said, I'm pretty sure being called a racist, Nazi, sexist, homophobic, transphobic, misogynist Trump's libtard socialist snowflake in the name-calling category, but whatever. But here's that plea you were looking for from a conservative journalist. Name-calling is lazy language. You're letting somebody else manipulate your reaction, plus it never persuades. The first rule of any engagement in debate or politics is to understand your opponent's position as well or better than your own. Conservatives, we have good messages resting on solid principles. Let logic and data speak for themselves to draw in independent voters. Take the time to reach out and listen to liberals and progressives. And there is no better forum for reaching out to seek to understand others and perhaps find some common ground in the process than Braver Angels. Check out upcoming events at braverangelswa.org, and I hope to see you there. We need more conservatives engaged in the debate. I hope that satisfies your request for a plea to conservatives to listen. Bill, thank you for joining me on this Forthright, and hope to see you on a future broadcast.